In 1929, one man made $100 million betting against the American economy. Wall Street called him the greatest trader who had ever lived. 11 years later, he sat down in the cloakroom of a hotel, wrote one line to his wife, and shot himself. His debts by then were more than $5 million. What remained of his fortune was close to nothing. The interesting question isn't how he lost the money. It's why being that intelligent didn't protect him from losing it.
There's a reasonable assumption most people make, that intelligence works like a kind of insurance against financial ruin. The data doesn't support it. A study out of Ohio State measured something almost nobody checks. Not income, but actual net worth against IQ. The correlation was 0.16, close to nothing. High IQ earners weren't better at keeping their money. They were more likely to max out a credit card than someone with an average score. That's the first data point, and it isn't the strangest one. 15 documented cases sit behind this video. A few famous, most buried in academic papers nobody outside finance reads. And nearly all of them point to the same pattern. It has almost nothing to do with how intelligent anyone involved actually was. Start with the paradox itself. Economist Jay Zagorski's research found that IQ explains barely 2% of the difference in people's net worth. Intelligence is very good at producing income. It has almost no relationship with keeping it, because earning and preserving are different skills, built through different habits, and most high earners only ever get good at one of them. Nowhere is that split clearer than in medicine. Research behind The Millionaire Next Door found physicians and surgeons consistently ranked among the worst wealth accumulators relative to their income. The reason wasn't a lack of financial knowledge, it was time. High-earning doctors were found to spend, on average, under 5 hours a month managing their own finances, roughly half of what a typical self-made millionaire spends. The people most equipped to understand a balance sheet were often the ones with the least time left over to look at their own. That's a knowledge gap, and it's the easier problem. The next one is harder to see because it doesn't feel like a gap at all. Researchers at Texas Tech and the University of Michigan tracked something quietly brutal. Financial decision-making ability declines by roughly 1% a year after age 60. That part is ordinary. Most skills fade with age. What doesn't fade is confidence in those same decisions. It stays flat. Sometimes it climbs. The years when judgment is weakening are, on average, the years someone feels most certain of their own judgment. That isn't something you can outthink, because the part of the mind that would notice the decline is the same part that's declining. It's a mechanism, not a character flaw. And it's why what follows isn't really a story about markets. It's a story about what happens when a sharp mind stops noticing its dulling and keeps making decisions as if nothing has changed. Warren Buffett has said, plainly, that his early partner Rick Guerin was every bit as sharp an investor as he and Charlie Munger were. The difference was leverage. Buying stock with borrowed money means small price moves get magnified, both up and down, and once prices fall far enough, a lender can force you to sell before you're ready to, at whatever price the market happens to be offering that day. Guerin borrowed to compound his gains faster. When markets broke in 1973 and 1974, the margin calls didn't care how sharp he was. He was forced to sell his Berkshire Hathaway shares back to Buffett for under $40 apiece. A single share trades for hundreds of thousands of dollars today. The mistake wasn't picking the wrong stock. It was building a position that couldn't survive being right a little too slowly. But different kind of overconfidence shows up in a completely different kind of mistake. In the early 1980s, two Berkeley finance professors engineered a hedging strategy called portfolio insurance. The idea was simple enough on paper. As prices fell, the strategy would automatically sell a small amount of stock to limit losses, the same way you might slowly ease off a brake instead of slamming it. Institutions adopted it because it promised safety without requiring anyone to predict the market. But when enough funds ran the same strategy at once, their selling pushed prices down further, which triggered more automatic selling, which pushed prices down again. On October 19, 1987, later assessments attributed roughly 15% of that day's total trading volume to this feedback loop.
a tool built by two of the smartest people in finance, designed specifically to prevent a crash, became one of the mechanisms that deepened it. Sometimes the failure isn't a model at all. It's certainty, spoken out loud at exactly the wrong moment. Just days before the 1929 crash, Irving Fisher, a Yale economics professor and America's first celebrity economist, stood in front of the country and declared that stocks had reached a permanently high plateau. He lost his own fortune, along with money he'd raised from his sister-in-law, and reportedly came close to losing his home. Yale is said to have quietly bought the house and rented it back to him so he wouldn't be evicted from it. Fisher wasn't lying to anyone. He believed what he said. That's what made it dangerous. Mark Twain built a fortune from his writing, and he was just as willing to bet on the future as any of the men before him. The problem was knowing which future to bet on. He poured the equivalent of a small fortune into a mechanical typesetting machine that never worked reliably, and kept funding it long after it was clear something was wrong. The way people tend to keep paying into something simply because they've already paid so much into it. He went bankrupt financing it. In roughly the same years, Alexander Graham Bell personally offered him a ground floor stake in the telephone. Twain turned it down. He thought it was a fad. The same instinct that made him double down on one bad bet made him walk away from a good one, both driven by how confident he felt, not by what the evidence actually showed.
Some people make a catastrophic mistake once. Victor Niederhofer, a Harvard and University of Chicago educated trader who worked for George Soros, made the same one twice. He blew up his own hedge fund in 1997, selling naked options during the Asian financial crisis, a bet that pays steadily right up until the one day it doesn't, and that one day erases years of gains at once. He mortgaged his house, rebuilt, started a new fund, and lost that one too in the 2007 crisis, in almost the same way. Surviving the first collapse seems to have taught him the wrong lesson. Not that the strategy was fragile, but that he was the kind of person who could survive it. The smartest man in England learned a version of the same lesson without ever touching a hedge fund. Isaac Newton sold his shares in the South Sea Company for 100% profit, early, before the real mania began. Then he watched everyone around him keep getting richer as the price climbed past where he'd sold. He bought back in near the top and lost what would be worth millions today. He later wrote that he could calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people. It's worth noticing that even Newton didn't lose his fortune to a bad calculation. He lost it to the feeling of being left behind. None of these are stories about a lack of intelligence. Each one is a story about a system with no room built in for ego, running up against a mind that never built one. The traps don't stop once someone reaches retirement. Some of them don't require a single bad decision at all. William Bengen, the man who invented the famous 4% withdrawal rule that much of American retirement planning is still built on, doesn't blindly follow his own rule. During the 2022 inflation spike, he moved a significant part of his own portfolio into cash and said publicly that a safe withdrawal rate might need to sit closer to 4.4%, not the number that made him famous. The person who wrote the rule still treats it as a starting point, not a guarantee.
Timing can do the same damage without any decision involved at all. Model a retirement that starts in almost any year, and the average return looks fine over time. Model one that starts in 1968, and a decade of stagflation quietly guts a portfolio that never technically crashed. There's no single bad year to point to, just a slow bleed that financial planning still treats as its worst-case test, because it's harder to see coming than a crash, and harder to protect against. Even the most disciplined savers aren't fully protected. Putting money into a pre-tax retirement account for 30 years feels like the responsible choice because the tax break is immediate and the bill feels far away. But the government eventually forces withdrawals from those accounts at an age and a size you don't get to choose, large enough to make up to 85% of Social Security taxable and to push retirees over Medicare surcharge thresholds they never had to think about while they were working. The people who saved the most correctly can end up penalized in the exact decade they can least afford a surprise. Then there's the trap almost nobody plans for early enough, because it's uncomfortable to think about while both spouses are still healthy. Medicare pays close to nothing toward long-term custodial care.
Without an irrevocable trust set up years in advance, in many states, a 5-year Medicaid look-back rule can force a healthy spouse to spend down almost everything the couple built together before any government support begins. None of it required a bad trade. It only required not building the structure early enough, while there was still time to build it without anyone noticing the clock was running.
Line up all of these cases side by side, and the real pattern isn't intelligence. It's the distance between skill and system. Skill is what makes money. Fast, personal, entirely dependent on one person's judgment in the moment it's needed. A system is what keeps money. Slower, impersonal, and it works precisely because it doesn't need anyone's judgment on their worst day. Every person in this story had elite skill. Not one of them had a system stronger than their own confidence. Guerin had no floor under his leverage. Fisher had no distance from his own certainty. Niederhofer had no mechanism to stop himself a second time, even after living through the first. And the confidence gap research explains why age doesn't fix this on its own. The exact decade judgment weakens is, on average, the decade confidence stays highest. That's the part more analysis can't solve, because analysis is the very skill that already failed everyone in this story. The only thing that seems to hold up is deciding the rules before you need them, while the judgment writing those rules is still sharp enough to know it won't stay that sharp forever. Newton said he could calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people. 3 centuries later, the market hasn't gotten any less mad. But for most of the people in this story, it was never really the market's madness that ended them. It was their own, arriving quietly, years later, wearing the same confidence that built the fortune in the first place.